Good evening and welcome to TiVi Tuần-san News of the Week. My name is Emma Doe. In today's news, 2 Australians detained in Vietnam for alleged drug smuggling. A Vietnamese journalist fired for posting a controversial Facebook status about Fidel Castro. And Labour Leader Bill Shorten addresses ethnic media organisations. To today's top story, a pair of Australians have been arrested in Ho Chi Minh City for running a drug smuggling operation. According to Vietnamese online news VN Express, the 2 have been identified as Vietnamese Australian siblings Lam Kim Phụng and Lam Dao Long. The duo has been accused of leading a gang that trafficked heroin and methamphetamines from Cambodia to Ho Chi Minh City. While no drugs were reportedly found on them at the time, VN Express reported that the accomplice was caught with more than 3 kilograms of drugs during a failed deal on November 28. 3 other alleged members of the gang have also been arrested. Further investigations are ongoing. To news in Vietnam. Flags flew at half-mast at government buildings across Vietnam on Sunday as the nation mourned for Fidel Castro. The National Day of Mourning was announced by the Communist government 3 days after the Cuban revolutionary died last month. But not all Vietnamese were supportive of the honour, usually afforded to senior Vietnamese politicians or war heroes. On social media, some Vietnamese expressed their disapproval. Newspaper journalist Phung Hieu was fired from his position for a post he made on Facebook about the late leader. In the post, he described Cuba as a poor and backwards country, ruled by a dictatorship and Marxist dogmatism. Officials from the Vietnamese Ministry of Information and Communication raised the post in a meeting with the Association of Journalists shortly after, accusing Hieu of expressing offensive and wrongful opinions about the Cuban revolutionary leader. Hieu was then stood down from his position of Saigon chief representative, and his editor-in-chief is to be suspended for 1 month. At least 13 people have been killed by floods that hit central Vietnam in late November. In the last week alone, 10 people have been killed by the torrential rains, and more than 10,000 homes in Bình Định and Quảng Ngãi province have been submerged. It's the 3rd flood to have hit the region since mid-October, when a tropical depression triggered non-stop rains. Floods back in October claimed 65 lives and 200,000 homes. On Friday last week, the government said that the losses from the October flood would cost close to $16 million. A number of Vietnamese fishermen detained in Indonesia have been sent back to Vietnam, according to the Vietnamese embassy in Indonesia. A total of 57 Vietnamese fishermen were repatriated. According to the news service Radio Free Asia, the men were detained by Indonesian officials after they were allegedly caught fishing off the coast of Bình Thuận, Kiên Giang, Tiền Giang and Bà Rịa Vũng Tàu provinces. This year, nearly 1,200 Vietnamese fishermen on 105 fishing vessels were detained by Indonesia. India has agreed to train Vietnam's fighter pilots in a deal that bolsters the country's defence ties. Vietnam's pilots will be trained on how to use the Russian-made fighter pilots called Sukhoi 30. Indian media report that the cost of training is still being worked out, but that the training will occur in India. The latest deal was struck between the Indian Defence Minister and his Vietnamese counterpart in a meeting on Monday, after nearly 2 years of negotiations. Since 2014, India has trained 550 Vietnamese sailors to operate submarines. In September this year, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi gave Hanoi a loan of $500 million for defence cooperation between the 2 countries. Back to news in Australia. The federal opposition has criticised the Turnbull government's plans to try and weaken Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act. The Act protects against racist and bigoted hate speech in Australia by making it unlawful to offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate on the basis of race, but recently this has been the subject of debate. The government has considered removing the words offend and insult and replacing them with the word vilify. On Wednesday, Labour leader Bill Shorten joined Shadow Minister for Citizenship and Multicultural Australia Tony Burke and the Shadow Attorney General Mark Dreyfus to address ethnic media outlets at a press conference in Melbourne. They told TiVi Tuần-san reporter Hong An Nguyen the existing law does not need to be changed.
For me, if I was the government of Australia, I'd be more worried about the fact that we've had we've had the national accounts figures that come in and we've got negative growth. For me, if I was the government of Australia, I'd be more concerned about the fact that Australian maths and science academic outcomes are now ranking us 25th in the world, that we've fallen. For me, if I was the Australian government, what I'd be worried about is that full-time jobs are disappearing and part-time jobs are being created. What worries me is about people being able to find quality aged care. What worries me is women not being treated equally to men. What worries me is children, young people not being able to get apprenticeships. Why do we have to focus on Section 18C?
What form of race hate speech do they say they should be able to be free to use in Australia? And we're going to, at the moment, stick to our very, very clear position, which is that no case has been made for change. If anything, the contrary. We need to have national leaders standing up and speaking out against racism. We need to have a continuation of the Australian Human Rights Commission campaign, racism, it stops with me. Because the kind of Australia I want to live in, the kind of Australia the Labour Party wants to develop, is a country in which race hate speech is gone.
According to the Financial Review newspaper, multicultural groups, including the Vietnamese community in Australia, are planning to send representatives to Canberra to campaign against proposed changes to the Act. Last Friday, members of the Vietnamese community welcomed a much-noted Vietnamese-American aerospace scientist and educator in an event to celebrate his life and work. 86-year-old Dr. Vinh Xuân Nguyen, who has been recognised for his literary contributions as a published poet and novelist, was in Melbourne for 3 days. Van Nguyen has the story.
About 100 members of the Vietnamese community in Melbourne attended an event on Friday the 2nd of December to celebrate the life and work of Vietnamese-American aerospace scientist and educator Vinh Xuân Nguyen, who arrived in Australia on Wednesday. The event started at 8:30 p.m. in Footscray's Rama restaurant and ran for over 2 hours. The theme of the night was the past, present and future of Vietnam, where retired Professor Vinh Xuân Nguyen began by sharing stories of his life experiences and thoughts of Vietnam's communist government. During the event, the audience was given an insight into some of his written works, including his Vietnamese novel titled Đời Phi Công, Pilot's Life, which won the 1961 Republic of Vietnam's National Literature Prize. Professor Kiều Tiến Dũng was one of the 3 guest speakers to share with the audience one of Dr. Vinh's publications. He explained the reason he attended the event.
I'm invited here today to introduce one of the books by Professor Nguyễn Xuân Vinh. That is a very difficult book, really, because it's not a novel. It's not a romantic novel. It's actually a academic book, a research in a way, and also a popularizing mathematics book. So, yeah.
Vinh Xuân Nguyen was formerly a pilot for the French Air Force in the 1950s and held high rankings as a member of the South Vietnamese Air Force before he emigrated to the United States. He is also an author of a number of books and over 100 technical papers in mathematics, astrodynamics, and trajectory optimization, which can be found in over 200 libraries worldwide. Thanh Khâm Trân Đặng is the president of the Australian Vietnamese Women's Association. She said she came to the event because Dr. Vinh is a well-known leader in the global Vietnamese community.
I know long time ago, Mr. Tuong Phong Nguyễn Xuân Vinh is one of the very talented Vietnamese mathematician.
Anh Đình Lê was also at the event.
I heard about Professor Nguyễn Xuân Vinh when I was a schoolboy in Vietnam, and I admire him so much, and that's the reason why I'm here today.
Dr. Vinh Xuân Nguyen said the night was a success and shared some advice for the younger Vietnamese generation.
Well, as I said today, that we must continue to think that we have a bright future for Vietnam once we can get rid of the communists in the country. and that really I encourage you to strongly support all the people now struggling in Vietnam to overcome the communism.
A new Vietnam War Memorial will be established in Sunshine's Kevin Whelan Garden as part of the 40th anniversary of the Vietnamese settlement in Australia. The memorial will pay tribute to the 521 Australians who lost their lives in the Vietnam War. It will also pay tribute to the Vietnamese people involved in the war and the Vietnamese community who now reside in Australia. The memorial is expected to include paving, granite, memorial stones, 2 flagpoles and a stone seating wall. It would complement the existing Avenue of Honour, which is a tribute to veterans from the Sunshine area who served in World War I. The plan has been approved by Brimbank Council and was a joint effort between various Vietnamese community associations in Australia, the Australian government and RSLs in the region. The ceremony to lay the foundations will take place on Saturday, December 17 from 11 AM to 1 PM. That's all from TiVi Tuần-san News of the Week. I'm Emma Doe. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to your company at the same time next week.